Chapter 25. Svalbard. Nora awoke in Svalbard. She's sharing a cabin with Ingrid Skierbeck, a geoscience professor. Nora quickly realizes she's hungover and far out of shape in this life than in previous ones. Here in Svalbard, the cold is almost burning. It seeps through thermals and clothing layers. When Ingrid asks Nora why she became a glaciologist, she responds by saying she loves the cold. To avoid having to answer, Nora asks Ingrid the same question. Nora gathers that the women are close because Ingrid discusses the intimate details of her life. Ingrid tried to forget her lover after he died, but his presence followed her wherever she went. She fled to Svalbard, but grief still haunts her because grief operates on memory. Meanwhile, Nora discovers a rifle in the cabin and realizes for the first time that she is living an exciting life. Chapter 26. Hugo Lefebvre. Nora goes to the cafeteria while trying to maintain a low profile. She gazes out the windows at the eerie beauty of the landscape while making mental notes about her colleagues. One of them, a man who would be more at home on a sunny beach somewhere, takes her seat and introduces himself as Hugo Lefebvre. He mentions how they've never spoken before and how much he admires her work on pulsing glaciers. Nora tries not to engage Hugo too much, but the curious scientist persists in his inquiries. Nora describes Hugo's demeanor as inquisitive and made her feel automatically guilty. At one point, Nora apologizes for her forgetfulness and suggests it's due to the vodka, but Hugo jokingly asks if her forgetfulness could be due to something else, adding to Nora's guilt. Hugo finally makes a joke about Nora being the day's spotter, though he doesn't elaborate. Nora is too afraid to ask what a spotter is because it will reveal her identity. Chapter 27. Walking in circles. Nora is now armed with a rifle on a small patch of ice-covered land. She understands now that her job as a spotter is to keep an eye out for polar bears and then warn the other scientists, who are all on the island but conducting fieldwork so that no one dies. She must fire a flare into the sky to alert everyone, then make as much noise as she can. The polar bear will usually flee if the spotter bangs a saucepan loudly enough and makes a lot of noise by shouting. If not, Nora must use the Winchester rifle to kill the bear. With the loss of habitat and food sources, polar bears have become far more aggressive and hungrier, and humans are a tempting protein snack for them. Nora walks in circles for more than an hour, wondering why she hasn't returned to the midnight library. She'd much rather be somewhere sunny or beautiful, like Paris. Nora's thoughts wander, and she recalls Thoreau's concept of solitude. Thoreau advocated for following one's dreams with confidence. Accepting solitude contributed to my confidence and success. Nora is beginning to feel a deep connection to the world and herself now that she is in such extreme solitude. Nora recalls a pleasant conversation with Ash, the doctor who offered to buy her coffee. When Nora's mother was diagnosed with cancer, she took her to the hospital where she ran into Ash, who recognized her from his visits to string theory. He mentioned in the hospital canteen that day that he thought social media made society lonelier. Nora notices a splash of water. Though she was expecting a polar bear, she is relieved to see a walrus. The walrus looks at her puzzledly before departing. When Nora starts eating, she hears another splash and notices something bigger than a walrus or a human approaching her. Chapter 28. A moment of extreme crisis in the middle of nowhere. Nora curses as she realizes she's in big trouble. Chapter 29. The annoyance of not finding a library when you really need one. A large polar bear approaches Nora. She freezes in fear before finally firing the flare. Mrs. Elm is summoned to the library by Nora, but nothing happens. She then bangs the saucepan loudly, but the bear is unconcerned. Nora realizes she won't have time to reach the rifle, learn how to use it, and dispatch a large bear. As her terror grows, Nora reveals an important truth: she didn't want to die. Nora's newfound enthusiasm for life compels her to redouble her efforts. She bangs on the saucepan loudly and rhythmically, assuring herself that she is not afraid. She blinks open her eyes as the polar bear returns to the water and her coworkers arrive. Chapter 30. Island. Nora and her colleagues return to the ship. Nora is in shock, and the others notice it, but her shock stems more from her strong desire to live now than from her near-death encounter with the polar bear. Nora now believes that being one with nature entails a desire to live. People, like the vast landscape around her, have a vastness within them, and Nora now relishes her vastness. Chapter 31. Permafrost. Back on board the main vessel, Nora continues to receive sympathy from her colleagues regarding the bear encounter. Nora admires everyone involved in this expedition because they are attempting to help the world by investigating why climate change is occurring so rapidly in the Arctic Circle. She truly admires their Spartan existence in the cold, with little to no recognition for their efforts. Nora then compares their calling in life to her previous feelings of mediocrity, which she thought were in her DNA. Lorenzo Conte, Nora's maternal grandfather, immigrated to London with aspirations of becoming wealthy. He married Patricia Brown, an Englishwoman who aspired to be an actress but settled for home life, and the couple had a daughter, Donna. Lorenzo and Patricia fought all the time, and Donna grew up believing that marriage was not only unavoidable, but also depressing. Nora's father, Jeff, once aspired to be a professional athlete before a devastating ligament injury forced him to settle for a menial job as a physical education teacher in Bedford. He regretted his life and, like his father, died of a heart attack. Nora believes she inherited her bad luck from her ancestors. There was an invisible baton of failure passed down, a baton she picked up and has been running with. While reflecting on past failures, Nora considers something other than failure, that life may simply be the act of navigating ups and downs rather than some grand, intense wave of non-stop perfection. She forgives both of her parents after realizing she loved them much more than she realized. Chapter 32. One night in Longyearbyen. Nora and the scientists return to Longyearbyen, and as they walk into town in search of a good meal, Nora remembers how desperately these scientists want to save the world by studying melting glaciers and climate change. Nora admires their desire to do good in their lives and resolves to live as well as she can. Hugo approaches Nora after dinner and informs her matter-of-factly that she has been acting strangely. Despite Nora's attempts to avoid him, Hugo admits that he lied to Nora about them never meeting. He also knows that Nora knows nothing about glaciers. Hugo then reveals that he, like Nora, is a person living multiple versions of their root life. Nora doesn't like or trust Hugo, but his confession piques her interest. She agrees to meet him in the kitchen to continue the conversation. Chapter 33. Expectation. Even though Nora has always expected herself to fail and has never truly accepted herself, she resolves to accept herself as readily as she accepts the natural world around her. For the first time in a long time, Nora feels liberated as a result of her acceptance. Chapter 34. Life and Death and the Quantum Wave Function. Nora and Hugo talk about their different experiences with being different versions of themselves. Hugo's in-between station is a video store run by his late uncle Philippe, whereas Nora's is the Midnight Library. He watches VHS tapes to relive other people's lives. Mrs. Elm and Uncle Philippe, according to Hugo, are interpretations. Most likely, the quantum realm they're experiencing in this in-between state is too complex for their human minds to comprehend, so it manifests as the library, the video store, Mrs. Elm and Uncle Philippe, all of which they recognize and trust. Hugo refers to them as sliders, and he has met many other sliders. The general template is always the same. The guide is someone the person once knew, and the guide guides them through an infinite number of possibilities. Hugo is a scientist at heart, but it wasn't until he met a quantum physicist who explained their predicament in terms of the quantum wave function that it made sense to him. The physicist described how, according to Schrödinger, every possibility exists at the same time, as demonstrated by the famous cat-in-the-box thought experiment. Even if one opens the box and sees the cat alive, the cat is both alive and dead because the cat died in another existence. Hugo goes on to say, every moment of your life you enter a new universe. With every choice you make. Normally, there is no communication between these worlds, but the Sliders have managed to communicate with their various selves. Hugo and Nora also talk about what happens when someone disappears from one's life. Hugo has witnessed someone else vanish while speaking. He explains that if Nora disappeared right now, the real her would be confused, and her brain would eventually cover up the missing information. Nora and Hugo flirt with each other throughout the conversation. Hugo admits to having lived nearly 300 lives at one point. Unlike Nora, he prefers the in-between to the root life. In his root life, he is dying of an aneurysm. They get closer when Hugo quotes Camus and says that Nora won't experience life if she's always looking for life's meaning. Nora kisses Hugo as they discuss the possibility that they were romantically involved in another life. Chapter 35. If something is happening to me, I want to be there. Nora and Hugo have sex, but Nora does not enjoy it. Hugo seemed detached from the act of sex, despite his intensity with life and conversation. Nora vanishes as she muses on her disappointment. Chapter 36. God and Other Librarians. When Nora returns to the Midnight Library, she inquires about Mrs. Elm's role in the library. Mrs. Elm admits that she, like everyone else, is a mechanism. Nora then criticizes the library's operation, claiming that she nearly died in her previous life and that it's not fair for her to die in a life that isn't her root life. Mrs. Elm, overjoyed, tells Nora that her declaration means she wants to live. Mrs. Elm demonstrates to Nora that the Book of Regrets is becoming lighter. The librarian begs Nora once more to choose wisely, especially since she may not have as much time as someone like Hugo to do so. When Nora makes her next decision, she considers joining a band with Ravi and her brother. Chapter 37. Fame. On stage, Nora enters this life. Vast, powerful human noise, a roar of life slowly finding rhythm and shape she hears as she takes in her surroundings. Developing into a chant. Nora is aware that she is in the labyrinths, exactly as she desired, and that they are performing in front of a large audience. She turns around, surprised to see Ravi on stage with her. When she inquires about her brother, Ravi replies that Joe is handling press somewhere. This new experience overwhelms Nora, and while Ravi asks her if she's okay, she notices a distance in his voice. When it's time for the encore, Nora suggests Beautiful Sky, but discovers they've already performed it. Ravi tells her they'll play Howl, but since Nora has no idea how to sing it, she improvises by saying they'll play Bridge Over Troubled Water instead. Chapter 38. Milky Way. Despite the large crowd waiting for Nora to sing, Nora draws strength from the people moving in unison around the venue. Chapter 39. Wild and Free. The crowd erupts when Nora mentions that the song she's about to play is special to her and Joe. She closes her eyes and sings after noticing a throat tattoo on her arm that says, "All good things are wild and free." After that, Ravi says they need to play Howl, but Nora finishes the concert quickly. Ravi asks Nora if she's okay as they return to their hotel. She then receives a message from Izzy that includes images of whales, as well as the same Thoreau quote about being wild and free. Nora also notices that she has over 11 million Instagram followers in this life. One of her posts is a poem titled Fire, similar to the one in Australia, but focusing on her holding power and wielding it as she sees fit. A woman later revealed to be their manager, Joanna, informs them of their success with the Simon and Garfunkel song Bridge Over Troubled Water. Ravi then inquires about a podcast with Joanna, only to discover that the interview has been rescheduled for that night, and that the interviewers are only interested in speaking with Nora. Joanna and Ravi are tense, but Nora remains silent. When Nora's phone rings again, it's for a video chat with Ryan. She accepts the conversation and realizes that Ryan, who has just called her babe, is the well-known American actor Ryan Bailey. Chapter 40. Ryan Bailey. Nora tries to remain calm, despite having a huge crush on Ryan Bailey in her real life. In addition, many of the people accompanying her back to the hotel are listening in on her video chat. Nora can only make small talk and is surprised to learn that she and Ryan once dated. Nora, it turns out, ended their relationship because she didn't see it going anywhere. Ryan is now seeing a therapist for his personality issues. Nora takes comfort in knowing that this version of herself broke up with Ryan as he begins spouting New Age spirituality at her. Nora reminds him that he mentioned liking philosophy in an interview once, before she hangs up. Ryan admits he doesn't read philosophy and that it was all for show. When their car arrives at the hotel, a large crowd awaits Nora's signature. The chapter concludes with Nora's social media post, "You can have everything and feel nothing." Chapter 41. A silver tray of honey cakes. Nora greets fans, signs autographs, and poses for photos, all while reflecting on how different her lives have been thus far. Joanna then introduces her to the interviewer for O Som, Brazil's most popular music podcast. Marcelo, the man, and his assistant accompany Joanna and Nora to Nora's suite for the interview. The rest of the band is dejectedly sitting in the bar. Nora attempts to invite them to the podcast, but Joanna and Marcelo are only interested in her. Chapter 42. The Podcast of Revelations. Nora is initially hesitant to engage with Marcelo. She wonders if she will be able to fake a stomachache, but she eventually begins answering the interviewer's questions with ease. Nora warms up to just speaking her mind when Marcelo mentions that "Stay Out of My Life" is a song about Nora needing a restraining order after her former boyfriend Dan broke into her house. After listing several setbacks in Nora's life, Marcelo asks why she believes the media dislikes her. Nora recalls everything she has learned thus far from visiting other lives and responds by saying that there is no one living in which a person can be happy all of the time. In fact, imagining there is just breeds more unhappiness in the life you're in. Marcelo interprets this affirmation to mean that Nora wants to project strength, particularly with her rendition of Bridge Over Troubled Water and the meaning of the song Howl. Nora is once again perplexed when she learns, to her horror, that her brother Joe died as a result of drug and alcohol abuse. Howl is about the death of her brother. Nora rushes back down to the bar, stunned, and confronts Ravi. Nora realizes there was some confusion when she asked about Joe at the concert earlier. Ravi mistook her for Joe, which is short for Joanne, the manager. Nora vanishes from this world, overcome by sadness. Chapter 43. Howl. This chapter contains the lyrics to the song Howl, which include "They want your body, they want your soul, they want fake smiles. That's rock and roll, and silence the music to improve the tune, stop the fake smiles and howl at the moon." Chapters 25 to 43 Analysis. Chapters 25 to 43 contain some of Nora's most enlightening experiences. In Chapter 26, she meets Hugo, who has similar experiences to her. Hugo arouses Nora's curiosity by explaining how rare and amazing their opportunity to experience life like this is from a scientific standpoint. Hugo explains that his VHS store and Nora's library are simplified projections of a complex theory known as a quantum wave function. In essence, there are an infinite number of possible worlds that coexist. Normally, there is no crossover between these worlds, but for some reason, people like Hugo and Nora have had the opportunity to experience this infinite possibility. It's a gift, and Hugo intends to enjoy it for as long as he can. Hugo's revelation implies that he and Nora exist outside of known experience, somewhere between life and death. It implies that their desire to live is so strong that their minds struggle with the concept of life and death as they live indefinitely. For scientists, the gray zone is a real-life conundrum. There has been researching to better understand the gray zone, such as tracking brain patterns of people who have had near-death or out-of-body experiences, as well as working with comatose patients. In chapters 27 to 29, Nora has her most thrilling experience when she comes face to face with a polar bear intent on devouring her. Though Nora initially hoped that her fear would send her back to the Midnight Library, she has since decided to live life to the fullest. Furthermore, Nora does not want to die, a sharp departure from the Nora of the novel's beginning. However, because Nora wishes to live, she is unable to return to the Midnight Library, which operates on disappointment rather than fear. Nora must find inner strength and endurance to survive. She digs deep and eventually finds her will to live, scaring the bear away and alerting her colleagues. This experience gives birth to an entirely new Nora, one who knows she is capable of great things if she sees herself as capable rather than stuck and doomed. Despite having a new lease on life, Nora's next life puts her newfound beliefs to the test. Nora now believes that the point of life is to simply live it, to accept the good and the bad, and to be okay with it all. However, in her next life, she encounters crushing fame as well as her brother's absence due to his death from drugs and alcohol. With Joe's death in this life, Nora must once again question whether she can accept the ups and downs of life and come out unscathed. Chapter 44. Love and Pain. When Nora returns to the Midnight Library, she demands that the procedure be halted. Mrs. Elm reminds Nora that she is the sole owner of the library. The library begins to shake when Nora declares that she no longer wishes to visit books. The lights go out as books fly off the shelves. Mrs. Elm quickly recalls how she felt with the polar bear, and Nora recalls wanting to feel alive. The shaking stops and the lights return. Mrs. Elm tells Nora not to touch any of the books that are now on the floor. She then apologizes for her harsh tone. Mrs. Elm tells Nora that she must approach life like a chess game, moving square by square with any pieces at her disposal. Even pawns can win games. Nora must persevere, just as she did when she was younger, and after drinking with her brother and his friends, jumped into a swift river to prove a point. Nora sees the scene unfolding in the library as she recalls this moment. Chapter 45. Equidistance. What Nora remembers most about the time she jumped into the water is that she couldn't move in either direction at first, due to the strong current. She was equally distant from both coasts. Mrs. Elm reminds her that she eventually chose a side and survived the ordeal. Chapter 46. Someone Else's Dream. Despite suffering from hypothermia and becoming ill for weeks after jumping into the river, Nora eventually took action. She made a decision and drew herself out of the river. The library returns to normal after she discusses the incident with Mrs. Elm, and the books reappear on the shelves. Nora simply wanted to impress Joe by jumping in the river, and when Mrs. Elm brings up the unsettling notion that Nora's parents preferred Joe, Nora admits she believed it. Mrs. Elm advises Nora to reconsider her life, saying, "You might need to stop worrying about other people's approval." Nora concurs. Her desire to make Joe happy influenced her decision to learn to play the piano. Furthermore, all of her previous lives have been someone else's dream: Joe's band, Dan's pub, Nora's father's dream of her swimming professionally, Mrs. Elm's suggestion that Nora study glaciology. Nora realizes she has a huge opportunity in cycling through new lives, so she resolves to think bigger and makes a go of exploring her options. Mrs. Elm and Nora play chess to prepare Nora for her next decision. Mrs. Elm explains while playing chess that there are more variations in chess moves than there are atoms in the known universe. Chess is all about possibility. Nora wins the game, and then she asks for a life in which she chooses to work at an animal shelter over string theory. Chapter 47. A Gentle Life. Nora likes her new life right away. The word gentle keeps coming to mind as she lives it. She works with dogs and cats, and particularly enjoys assisting a bull mastiff rescued from abusive owners. Nora wishes for a life free of cruelty, but for that dream to come true, she must live in a world without humans. Nora recalls a Schopenhauer quote, "Compassion is the foundation of morality," 198. Nora applies this concept to her daily life by embracing the slow, gentle pace of life in Bedford. At lunch one day, a co-worker named Dylan sits next to Nora and they talk about dogs and the possibility of rain. Nora jumps when Dylan wraps his arm around her. Nora discovers Dylan is her boyfriend in this life. She then recalls seeing him running by the library at school on the day her father died all those years ago. Dylan is shy but talkative, and Nora believes that the Nora of this life likes Dylan because he appears to be as loyal and lovable as a dog. Chapter 48. Why would you want another universe if this one has dogs? Nora and Dylan go out to eat at a Mexican restaurant. They notice on their way that string theory is no longer in business. There's an old sign up thanking customers and saying goodbye in a humorous yet poignant way through song lyrics. Nora wonders if the store closed because she wasn't selling instruments there. Nora then asks Dylan if he considers living other lives, but Dylan isn't interested in doing so because the one he's in has dogs. Dylan went away to college for a short time to become a vet, but his father couldn't afford it, so Dylan had to return home. Dylan was fine with returning because he enjoys the peace and quiet of Bedford. When they get close to the restaurant, Nora sees Ash running by and says hello, but Ash has never met her in their life. Chapter 49. Dinner with Dylan. La Cantina, the restaurant, hasn't changed much. Nora once came here with Dan, and he was rude to the waitstaff. Nora wonders why she let this bad example of Dan's character slide when they were dating. Dylan enjoys the bright, gaudy restaurant, and Nora wonders if Dylan could find it in himself to enjoy even a bad environment. Dylan and Nora talk about school and dogs, and Dylan recalls her former love of swimming and a special assembly at school where she was awarded a certificate of achievement. Nora believes the assembly, and how much attention it drew to her, is what caused her to withdraw from competitive swimming. Dylan then mentions that Mrs. Elm is now in a nursing home and appears frail and old. Nora is concerned about Mrs. Elm at the end of the chapter. Chapter 50. Last Chance Saloon. After dinner, Nora and Dylan go to his house to watch Ryan Bailey's latest film, Last Chance Saloon. Dylan has several dogs, and the smell of dogs overwhelms Nora. As they watch the movie, Nora has a new sensation. She has taken the life of someone else. She wishes to be the Nora who fell in love with Dylan. Before Nora fades away, she reads the label of a wine bottle, which describes an idyllic life tending vineyards and making wine. Chapter 51. Buena Vista Vineyard. In the next life, Nora lives in the United States, where she runs a winery with her husband, Eduardo Martinez. This life is easier to navigate because Nora mostly just tells tourists about wine. Eduardo is laid back, but his carefree attitude toward Nora suggests that he doesn't pay attention to her, and Nora observes, "It was easy to fake everything in this life." This feeling returns when Nora and Eduardo drink wine while gazing up at the stars that night. They sit in the silence that people who are comfortable with each other share, but Eduardo fiddles with his phone and then easily go to bed without Nora. They exist like best friends. Nora wants more out of life, so she waits to die. Chapter 52. The Many Lives of Nora Seed. Nora can live many lives without having to stay in any of them because she has to believe that there is no other version of life worth living. As a result, Nora, like Hugo, has many lives. Nora's many lives include teaching music in Montreal, cat-sitting, working as an aid worker in Botswana, being a concert pianist, only eating toast, being a vegan powerlifter, and on and on. Hugo reappears in another life, but he fades away as they converse. The more lives Nora has, the more she realizes that her desire to die stemmed from convincing herself that meaninglessness was all there was in her root life. This distinction enables Nora to distinguish between fear and despair. Fear is manageable because it boils down to worry, whereas despair implies a fixed state. Despite learning these life lessons, Nora began to lose any sense of who she was. Unlike Hugo, Nora longs for a life where she can establish roots, so the constant experiences erode her sense of self. Chapters 44 to 52 Analysis. Nora has a near miss in this section when her rage at Joe dying in her fame life prevents her from returning to the Midnight Library. Mrs. Elm must remind Nora that she was determined to live when confronted with the polar bear, and the library returns to normal once Nora remembers this change in character. Mrs. Elm makes it clear to Nora that she has always tried to live for others. Nora must decide to live for herself and not worry about what others think or do to make full use of her infinite lives and better understand what she wants in life. Nora improves her ability to choose lives, and she even has a gentle life with Dylan. Nora eventually begins to live her life in the manner of Hugo. She warms to the idea of experiencing everything and has a good time exploring her life for a while. Nora now realizes that her root life suffered as a result of the way she allowed her mind to perceive misfortune. She compared bad times to despair, which makes one believe that life is stuck or fixed. Nora, ironically, wants to feel grounded in one authentic life. Nora has reached yet another crossroads in her journey. She wants a place to call home. Furthermore, each time Nora moves to another life, she begins to feel as if she is living someone else's life. This realization foreshadows Nora's later decision about what life to lead.